You opened an app this morning, swiped through a few faces over coffee, and matched with someone who lives on the other side of a city you both chose to move to. Finding a partner today is so easy, it's basically a game. You filter by height, by hobbies, by whether they like dogs. You meet a stranger, you decide if you like them, and you walk away whenever you want. The whole thing runs on choice. Your choice, her choice. 12,000 years ago, that same search for a partner could take a lifetime, cost you your safety, and might not involve much choice at all. There was no app, no city full of strangers, just a tiny band of people you'd known since birth, most of them your cousins, and a hard biological rule hanging over all of it. You could not marry inside your own group. So somebody had to leave. Somebody had to cross dangerous country to a band they barely knew and start a whole new life there. And here's the strange part. Across almost every ancient human society we can study, the person who left was the woman, which is where our favorite myth comes in. The caveman with the club, knocking a woman out and dragging her home by the hair. We all grew up with that image, so let's do something simple. Let's put modern life and ancient life side by side and find out what actually happened. Start with the myth itself, because even the myth is a comparison, just a dishonest one. Today you probably picture your ancestors as brutes, grunting, violent, dragging women around by the hair, and you picture yourself as the civilized end of that story. Here's the twist. That comparison wasn't drawn by scientists. It was drawn by Victorians in top hats, and they drew it on purpose. In 1865, a Scottish lawyer named John Ferguson MacLennan wrote a book called Primitive Marriage and coined a phrase that stuck for 100 years. Marriage by capture. His theory was that early humans were savage and warlike, that they stole their wives, and that civilization was just humanity slowly climbing up out of that mud toward, conveniently, Victorian England. He had almost no evidence. He never watched a hunter-gatherer in his life. He leaned on wildly exaggerated, sometimes flat-out invented accounts of Aboriginal Australians, and he started from the answer he wanted and worked backward. Then Darwin repeated it in 1871, and once Darwin says a thing, people stop checking. But notice what the story did for them. It let a Victorian man compare himself to an imaginary caveman and feel civilized, and it let him tell the women of his own time, women who couldn't vote or own property, that at least they weren't getting clubbed and dragged into a cave. The comparison flattered the present by inventing a brutal past. The hair drag itself is younger still. It's a cartoon gag from a 1923 Buster Keaton film, which the Flintstones later burned into every childhood since. So the very first comparison to throw out is the one you were raised on. That caveman is younger than the light bulb. He's not your ancestor. He's a costume. So let's build an honest comparison instead. Today, if you want to know where someone grew up, you check their profile. It says the city right there. Ancient people didn't leave profiles, but it turns out they left something better. They left it in their teeth. When you were a kid and your adult teeth were forming, they locked in a chemical signature from the ground you grew up on, a ratio of strontium isotopes that came up out of the local bedrock, through the water and the food, and got sealed into your enamel permanently. Different regions, different bedrock, different signature. So your teeth are basically a hometown tag you can never take off. And unlike a profile, it can't lie, and it never updates. Move 1,000 miles as an adult, and your teeth still name the place you were a child. Dig up that tooth 2 million years later, and it will still tell you where its owner grew up. We have a tool for reading ancient hometowns that is more honest than anything on your phone. And when scientists used it, the comparison to modern life got fascinating. In 2011, researchers tested the teeth of some of our oldest relatives, Australopithecus africanus and Paranthropus robustus, from South African caves, teeth up to 2 million years old. They sorted them by size. Larger teeth, most likely males. Smaller teeth, most likely females. Then they asked each tooth one question. Did you grow up around here or somewhere else? The males overwhelmingly grew up right there and never left. The females, far more often, came from somewhere else. Think about how that compares to now. Today in most of the world, both people are free to move, and plenty of couples meet where one of them relocated for work or school. 2 million years ago, there was a fixed pattern, and it ran the other way from what the cartoon implies. The men stayed put their whole lives. The women were the ones who traveled, who left the only people they'd ever known and joined a new group. Scientists call it patrilocality or female dispersal, and a 2023 reanalysis of the same teeth confirmed it all over again. Now compare the distant past to the more recent past, because the pattern doesn't break. It holds. In 2022, a study in the journal Nature sequenced DNA from 13 Neanderthals in 2 Siberian caves and found something we'd never seen. A father and his teenage daughter, plus a cluster of close relatives, all alive at once. The first actual Neanderthal family. Then the scientists compared 2 family lines inside those bodies. The Y chromosome passed father to son, and mitochondrial DNA passed mother to child. The male line showed almost no variety. All the men were closely related, homegrown, one small lineage. but the female line was wildly diverse. The researchers estimated that around 60% of the women in that community had come from other groups entirely. Same pattern as the 2 million-year-old teeth. And here's the comparison that should stick with you. Today, when you move for a relationship, you keep your phone, your bank, your friends, a plane ticket home. A Neanderthal woman who left her band left everything forever with no way back, walking into a group of strangers to keep her people's bloodline alive. We call moving in together a big step. For her, it was the entire world, gone and replaced in a single journey. So across the whole human family, from Australopithecus to Neanderthals to nearly every modern society on record, it's overwhelmingly the women who moved. Which forces the question the whole video is really about. Were they taken? Or were they leaving on purpose? And this is where I have to be honest, because the comparison people want is a clean one, and reality isn't clean. The teeth and the DNA prove women moved. They do not tell us why. Enamel can't record consent. A woman walking proudly into a new group as part of a peace deal, and a woman dragged there against her will, leave the exact same chemical trace. So we reason it out, and we compare the two possibilities. The first is alliance, and it's the one that actually built the modern world you live in. Think about why you leave your hometown today. For opportunity, for connection, to build a network, to not be trapped in one small place. Ancient people did the exact same thing, just with marriage as the tool. When a group sent a daughter to the band in the next valley, they weren't losing her, they were building a bridge. Now they had trade routes, they had a peace treaty. Because you don't raid the camp where your own daughter lives. They had somewhere to run when the hunt failed, and they solved a life or death problem you never have to think about. Inbreeding. A small band that only marries its cousins is a genetic dead end. Marrying outward keeps the bloodline alive. Evolution rewarded the groups that traded partners, and the ones that didn't aren't here to argue. We've even caught them doing it. At a site called Sung-Hir in Russia, about 34,000 years old, people buried together turned out not to be closely related. They were deliberately avoiding marrying kin. Compare that to the myth for a second. The cartoon says chaos and clubs. The evidence says these people were running a careful marriage network more organized than most people assume a dating app is. But I won't pretend the second possibility never happened, because capture was real. Just not the way the cartoon shows it. Look at the Yanomami of the Amazon, studied closely in the 20th century. Rival villages did raid each other, and captured women were sometimes taken. That's true, and it's dark. But the crucial detail is that the raids generally weren't launched to grab women in the first place. A capture was usually a byproduct of a conflict that started over something else. And kidnapping became the spark for the next feud. Not the plan behind the last one. And compare the cost to the payoff. A raid gets your best men killed and locks your group into revenge for generations. Asking the neighbors for a marriage alliance costs you a conversation and a gift. For most groups, most of the time, trading partners was simply smarter than stealing them. So the honest answer is that it was both. Capture in some times and places, exchange in far more of them. But the engine that ran for hundreds of thousands of years looks far more like alliance than abduction. Moving is not the same as being taken. Which brings the comparison all the way home to right now. If the evidence points to alliances, why won't the club and drag caveman die? Because comparing ourselves to a brutal ancestor still feels good. It's a simple story, it flatters the present, and it lets us treat male aggression like a factory setting we've since upgraded out of. But here's the uncomfortable part. Forced marriage by capture is not something we left behind in a cave. It's happening today. In Kyrgyzstan, a practice called alakachu, which literally means grab and run, still accounts for an estimated 15 to 30% of marriages. Thousands of women a year, taken and pressured into marrying men they didn't choose. It's illegal, and it persists. So compare the two images honestly. On one side, ancient people building careful alliances to survive. On the other, a real, modern, ongoing form of bride capture that we would rather blame on cavemen than admit is ours. We invented a savage past partly so we wouldn't have to look at the present. So, did ancient humans steal their women? Here's the best answer the evidence allows. The women moved. That part is written into 2 million-year-old teeth and Neanderthal DNA. But the reason was mostly alliance, exchange, and the quiet, desperate need to avoid inbreeding. Not a man with a club. Capture happened, but it was the exception, not the rule. Today, you find a partner with a swipe and a choice. Back then, someone crossed dangerous country and gave up everything they knew to keep a whole people alive. That's not a brute dragging a woman by the hair. That's one of the most demanding, most human things anyone has ever done. And we spent 150 years cartooning it into a joke. And that leaves one last myth standing, the biggest one of all. We've just seen that ancient women held the whole system together, that they were the ones who moved, who built the alliances, who kept entire bloodlines alive. So maybe the real question was never how the men treated them. Maybe it's the other way around. Next time, we find out who was actually in charge back there. Were cavemen actually ruled by women? Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.